Don says in question 6, as I understand what you say, the instrument is to have no sugar until late in the afternoon. Is that correct? Ross says no. I actually thought that's... no, yeah, not exactly. Let's see. Don asks, I didn't fully understand what you meant about when she should have the sugar. Could you clear that up, please? Ross says, the concentrated sugar, that is the dessert, the ice cream, the cookie, should be ingested at that time. Small amounts of the fructose, maple, and raw honey may be ingested periodically for, as we have said, the chemistry of this yellow ray body is such that the sugar is being used by blood enzymes as wood carbohydrates in a less distorted yellow ray physical vehicle. So here's my speculation on the whole thing, and maybe I'll go on a tangent here with carbohydrates. So, again, we see the situation with Carla being sort of ill with her intestines. She wasn't absorbing much nutrients from regular foods, right? If she would eat fruits or even vegetables or grains, the availability of the nutrients would be hindered by her conditions. Why is that? Because her intestines, let's say healthy intestines, they're able to work and break down and absorb many nutrients. Whereas in her condition, she wasn't able to do that. She needed to cook her foods, all of them, including fruits and vegetables as well, so they could be mushy and easily digestible. Remember that she was also in a very low weight of around 80 pounds, and that is hormones are working very differently there because you're sort of in a controlled starvation. So I wouldn't even say control, but just what's the word? It's been going unchecked. There's a starvation state that's been gone unchecked. And so that is creating an environment of hormones and enzymes that are not the same as with somebody who is stable in a specific weight and healthy, active, and so on. So again, I don't mean to give any sort of advice, just talk about this in general. Everybody is a different case, and of course we learn this when we begin to work with people in nutrition and training. Everybody's a specific case. But talking about the carbohydrates, I see that not only did she have an addiction for sugar, which is very common in this world nowadays, and it's been going for decades, of course, but the availability of sugars is everywhere and everything has sugar. So understandable she would have this addiction, but also carbohydrates seem to be also the preference that she had for consuming food. So I guess that's why Rise recommended that she would keep things that we consider unhealthy, like ice cream, cookies. I mean, these are the staple junk food, that we tend to avoid or limit as much as possible. But they're saying in the late afternoon, eat those. I like that in the morning they say small amounts of fructose. Fructose is the sugar present in, as the word suggests, fruits. And just because I like to get nerd on this, there is in general two types of carbohydrates. That's glucose and fructose. So fructose is present 100% in fruits, as far as I know. Maybe there's a little variation, and there is some glucose present in some fruits, but I doubt it. This is old knowledge, but I think it still stands. So those are fruits. Maple and honey actually are a combination of glucose and fructose. I forget, but it's usually more fructose than glucose. And the difference here, just because I'm getting all nerd on this, is that fructose can only be stored in the liver. You cannot transport glucose rather fructose to muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is the second organ in which, or tissue in general, where carbohydrates, or rather glycogen, is stored. So I understand the suggestion to first eat fructose, because when you wake up in the morning, your liver is depleted, and so that's why fruits in the morning are so classic, because you want to replenish liver glycogen, which is through fruits. I mean, if you eat anything else, you eat bread or something else, and it's carbohydrates, they're also going to be stored in the liver. But fructose can only be stored there in the liver, and the liver has a capacity of 50 grams of carbohydrates. Let's just call them carbohydrates at this point. And if you want to eat more, then that would either try to be processed in the liver, and if it's full, then guess what? It'll have to be transformed into fat, and that's where we get into liver fat. Or if it's glucose, it'll try to go into the muscle tissue. Now, again, do you use your muscle enough to also deplete the glycogen that is there? Glycogen is the stored form of carbohydrate in the muscles. That's a question. So how much of that do you eat? And how much of that you use? And that's why we recommend exercise, particularly I'm going to call it weightlifting. It doesn't have to be weights, but just create tension in the muscles. That's how you use glycogen, or muscle glycogen. You always want to keep, this a healthy system in which you're consuming a certain amount and you're using a certain amount. This gets all technical and boring, but the point is that that's the system in which you're ingesting and you're using, and you want to keep that balance. So the recommendation: fructose and maple or honey. I like those recommendations for the morning. Breaking your fast in the morning with, I would recommend honey. Honey has many more properties. Maple, it's a little bit more devoid from other substances that are present in honey. And they recommend, again, this, I have so many things that I would like to talk to Ra about. People usually ask me, what would you ask Ra, if you had a question? I would say, why did you recommend ice cream and cookies? What's wrong with you? No, but here I kind of understand, Carla needed anything. And that's why they say, here's the answer. See, I don't have to ask Ra anything. They say that because the chemistry of her body was so used to sugar, and they're being used by the blood enzymes, which is kind of a question for me, because we don't have particular blood enzymes that use carbohydrates or are involved in the metabolism of carbohydrates. We can talk about pancreatic enzymes and liver enzymes, maybe because they can be measured in blood, in the bloodstream, but they're not particular from the blood. They're from pancreas and liver, some in the intestines. So I don't know. I don't know what they mean, but maybe that's what they meant. Those enzymes that help metabolize carbohydrate. The whole point is that she was able to process these carbohydrates by easily, because she was used to. And now it speaks to something else, which is how we get used to processing certain foods. The body becomes efficient at breaking down these types of food. And so you will find that you are more inclined to eat the same things all the time. Now, because I want to make this a little bit informative in terms of how your body works, and if you have some doubts about what you should be eating, then this can actually help. What you shouldn't be eating, right? But your body asks for it. So you're used to certain foods, junk food especially, and your body has become accustomed to metabolizing these foods, and so it'll ask for it. If you gradually change it I know it's going to be a little bit difficult at the beginning because your body is still demanding this food. Just keep up with it, and you will see the body will have to adapt, because guess what? It's not available, so why would it keep asking for it? But you have to stay consistent. Something happens, especially with sugar consumption, and I attest to this with many people that I have had around me and do this, is that your tolerance for sugar is reduced tremendously. You have no idea how much your tolerance for sugar has been increased, meaning that you can eat a lot of sugar. I was a sugar addict for years, especially when I was bodybuilding. I would eat vast amounts of sugar. And when I went through this process of just keeping my diet as clean as possible in terms of, and clean doesn't mean that you won't eat certain things. It's just that you're based always on whole foods. That's it. That's the trick. When I tried again to eat some sugars that I had long abolished from my diet, it was so cloying, it was so overwhelming that I could feel the difference of staying away from sugars. So again, that's not the case here, because Carla needed anything that she could absorb, and I kind of understand it. So there's a lot to be said here, or at least I have a lot to say. But if I can leave just a sort of summary for anybody, is that carbohydrates they're an essential part of our diet, meaning that it's very hard to eliminate them. Yes, there is the ketogenic diet, which I did for years, and it's actually a good idea if I could recommend people lower in their carbohydrates, because the reason why we have demonized them is because they are pretty addictive. They're easy to absorb and they're abundant. So why not try it and reduce them? And again, I'm not suggesting a ketogenic diet, but that's even a possibility to play with. But if I can add a trick to this way to lower tolerance on carbohydrates and begin to enjoy more whole foods, fasting, intermittent fasting, it's a big one. And it doesn't take long. I mean, it doesn't take much before you adapt to it. Just skip breakfast for an hour and so on, until you get to a good 16 hours of no eating. It is easier than you can imagine. And what would happen is that your tolerance for food will lower, and you'll be able to eat less food, be more sensitive to carbohydrates or sugars in general, and you may want to eat, more whole foods. Again, this doesn't work for everybody, and there's some coaching needed, which I would love to offer to you, but I no longer do that. So, sorry, can't help you there. But the internet is full of people that can. However, that's my suggestion. Carbohydrates are not the devil. It's just that we have been accustomed to eating so much of it, particularly in the form of sugars. And last thing I'll say, because I mentioned ketogenic diet, when you begin to eat a ketogenic diet, for those who don't know it, is where you eat the vast majority of your calories come from fats and proteins. So the limit is 50 grams of carbohydrates. You would see how little that is in a regular diet. I think the regular American eats about 300 to 400 grams of carbohydrates a day, something like that, which is a lot. Remember that I said that the liver can only store 50, and your muscles, depending on your muscle mass, can get to 700 to 1200, but that's stored in there, and if you don't use it, it's still stored. So this is what generates problems in the pancreas with insulin resistance. This is what creates all sorts of fat, adipose tissue, liver tissue, or liver fat, all kinds of issues in the body. It's just an overconsumption of carbohydrates. Fun note, just because I'm so excited to talk about this. Carbohydrates do not turn into fat. That's a big mistake that a lot of people think. Carbohydrates do not get stored as fat. There is a pathway in the body for that, and it's almost never used. Only in obese people, morbidly obese, that's when it's usually, active. But to get to that point, it's very difficult. So I won't get into the details, just wanted to throw that in. I know I threw a lot of information and misconceptions about this, but hey, I got started with this. This episode doesn't have much material, and why not? I can talk more about this. Maybe in the conclusions I'll add more stuff. But that's all I got for now.